I want to think that this video goes without saying, but I don't think it does. So let's talk about QA or QV or testing. These are usually the same department with different names. QA stands for quality assurance, QV for quality verification, testing for testing the game. I'm going to make the argument that you want dedicated testing on your game if you can pull it off. So if you're a small project, not a lot of resources, everyone's already wearing a lot of different hats, then you're probably going to have to rely on your team to do the testing. And that's okay. And even if you're a large team, and even if you have dedicated testers, you still want your team to be playing the game. But dedicated testers give you something that your developers don't. Good QA people have an ability to play the game in ways that are non-standard. So let me give you some examples. When you play a game, chances are, if there's a path, you stay on or at least near that path because the visual cues of the game are encouraging that play behavior. What if there's collision missing at the edge of the path? Or what if something weird happens if you go backwards down the path? If you have a progression system about your different styles of guns, say you have a pistol tree and a rifle tree and a heavy ordnance tree. Most people are going to go deep down the tree that they mostly use. You mostly use pistols, you're going to go down the pistol tree. Or they'll dabble in a few different trees. But what if there's a weird ability at the bottom of the pistol tree that makes your heavy ordnance super overpowered? This is the sort of thing that can be difficult for your developers to find because they know how things are supposed to be played and they will have a tendency to do that. One of the reasons that bugs often get introduced when people are adding new content, it's not necessarily because they aren't testing it, it's because they're testing it in expected ways. What QA provides is that non-expected play behavior. And so they can find things that your team is going to have a lot more difficulty with. The other thing that's specific, I think, more to AAA or HD development is that the teams have become hyper specialized. So instead of having a character modeler or even just a modeler in general, you might have someone who is entirely focused on skinning. Now that guy is going to be really good at finding bugs in the skins, and he might be pretty good at finding things in the models around him, but that specialization can often lead to a narrowing of focus and reduce their ability to find more general bugs in other parts of the game. So instead of having a team in AAA that is capable of testing the entire game, what you have is a bunch of people, each of whom is capable of testing a very narrow segment of the game. And then you end up without having coverage between those pieces. Most of your bugs are going to come from your testers because they are dedicated to that exercise and they are trained or experienced at least in that endeavor. And so they can find things that are going to be difficult for others to find. The other thing that a good QA team can provide is the ability to determine the testability of something. It's very easy to make a system that's very intricate and seems very elegant, but ultimately is completely untestable. And an experienced QA team is going to be able to flag those early in development so you can steer away from them and potentially redesign your system so that it actually is testable. Some of you might be thinking, but what about automated testing? What about beta testing? What about other sources of testing? And these are all beneficial and useful. Automated testing is something that you should use for things that can be articulated very clearly. And indeed, I actually think that we should see more automated testing because the sorts of things that are easy to automate are the sort of things that aren't necessarily the best use of your QA people anyway. These are the things where you're testing the numerical stability of different systems or ensuring that you have the right kind of meshes or that everything has a texture. By automating those things, you actually free up your QA people to focus on what I think is their biggest benefit, which is that chaos testing when they're playing the game in a relatively normal way. But again, because they are QA, they play it in a normal but edge casey kind of way, finding the things that your tests don't find. Use the automated testing to catch the single points of failure as opposed to the intricacies of many systems working together. You can use your QA people for that. And a good experienced QA team can come up with test plans that will give that kind of broad coverage. So if I've convinced you that you should have dedicated testers, there are a bunch of different ways to go about it. You can have testers embedded into your teams that sit with your development teams and are part of those little pods and provide testing expertise in the moment as part of the team. You can have dedicated test groups as part of your team that provide your test plans, that help play the game as a whole, and who manage the testing process. Or you can go outside the company to various testing outsourcers who will provide massive amounts of bandwidth to provide testing. I would argue you want to do all three of these things. Dedicated embedded testing is great for finding a lack of testability, for providing qualitative feedback in the moment. But because they're integrated into the team, they can start to develop that expected behavior that you get from the devs. So they can also start to become a little bug blind to systems working in non-standard ways because they're used to testing it in a particular way. A centralized testing group that's part of your team, that's good because they understand what the game is supposed to be, so they can look for deviation. They're embedded with the team, so they know what phase you're in, and they can help guide the testing process of the game as a whole. They don't have that micro understanding of an individual systems, so some of their feedback can be a little more generalized, but that can also be useful. External test groups are great for providing bandwidth because at different points of your project, you require different amounts of testing. So you don't want to have huge numbers of testers that you're hiring on and then firing. You're better off going to a testing organization who can keep these people on staff and move them between different projects, or at least hopefully keep them on staff and not just be secretly laying them off as soon as you don't need them anymore. But because they're outside of the team, they do require a lot of training. The way you want a bug formatted is probably different than the way that Activision wants the bug formatted. The things you want tested and accept bugs on are different. If you've been listening to me, you want them to file bugs on everything, but other teams are going to be much more restrictive in terms of what's allowed to be filed. So they do require a ramp up, and it's worth your time to send some of your internal QA to that company to train them, because trained, they will be many times more valuable to you than untrained. But they still provide bandwidth that you're not going to be able to have internally. So I think you want all three of these things: embedded QA, internal QA that's not embedded, as well as external QA. You also want to bring in people fresh as you go. I've talked about bug blindness a little bit, and basically you want people who have an objectivity. They don't have preconceived expectations of the way that the game works or things that are okay to not file. And so those fresh eyes are able to see things that maybe the rest of the testing team has stopped being able to see. There can be a tendency at some companies to treat the QA department as if it is an enemy almost. Some places keep them in a separate building or on a separate floor, and I don't agree with that. I can see one argument for it, which is to try to maintain that objectivity, that second set of eyes that's not colored by the information that isn't within the game, because ultimately your design documents and your vision presentations are not being shipped to the people playing your game, so they shouldn't necessarily be part of the testing process. But I just think that that sort of adversarial us versus them approach is not healthy and not the way you want to go. So my recommendation, even with external people who are part of another company, is to treat them as much a part of the team as you can. In some jurisdictions, you can get into weird things about co-employment, where if you pull them too far into the loop, then they cease being contractors and become employees. So obviously you need to stay on side from a legal perspective, but I think the more you can integrate them into the team, treat them as members of the team, the better the results you are going to get from them. I hope that this video is just speaking to people that are saying, well, of course QA is valuable. Of course QA needs to be on a project that can afford it. But this video was actually asked for specifically by someone in the community, so I felt that it was worth making to say that you definitely want QA if you can possibly afford it. And if you are in AAA or HD, you can absolutely afford it. One last thing, just to sort of talk about bug blindness a little bit. This video contains one major bug that I think is pretty obvious, but I'm curious as to whether or not you all noticed it. Hopefully this video was informative, and maybe I changed a few minds. I hope so. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link down in the description. If you found this video interesting or you want to use it to make a point with someone, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone else. Both of those things will tell the YouTube algorithm that this video is worth spreading more widely. I will see you again soon. Thank you.